All right, let's kick it off with part one. And I'm going to label this the outcome trap. What I mean by that is that winning is not always high performance. So, this particularly resonates for me with athletes, but it can extend to any arena. Just because you win, it doesn't mean you're high performing. What I want to do is frame reflection in a high performance mindset. At Purple Patch, we often discuss the elements that make up that high performance mindset. And it's traits like being coachable, and that includes the ability to communicate really effectively, to provide and receive feedback, to think about collaboration, etc. We also dig into resilience, both physical resilience, but also mental resiliency, to keep going when things get really tough. The need to be changeable or adaptable is the more common word, and relentlessly focused on controlling the controllables. All of these other traits that we come in, and we discuss these, we've had whole episodes on these, and they're absolutely foundational. But in my belief, one of the high performance traits that's often overlooked is reflection. And I think that in many ways, reflection is one of the linchpins that really ties all of these traits together. And yet, I see so many folks that are very committed, very tough, and ambitious towards improving either their athletic performance or their performance in business, whatever it might be, and really failing to come out of the weeds, get the perspective, and look back so that they can ensure that they're driving forward. And so reflection is one of those things that really helps us fall into what I label the outcome trap, where results deceive you into thinking that you're performing at your best, even when actually you're not. I'm going to give you an example of this. I'm going to tell you a story of an athlete that I coached that won, and as you're going to hear, won yet again. But in my mind as a coach, didn't perform. And this is important. Now, this is one of my favorite athletes I ever got to coach, Purple Patch Pro Jesse Thomas. And he was a wonderful athlete. He was incredibly smart, driven, athletically very gifted. And he was also one of the athletes that had the highest, what I label athletic IQs that I'd ever coached. In other words, he was very, very smart with his decision making, his self management, his execution of races, etc. And he won a lot of races over the course of his decade-long professional career. But he was probably best known within the world of triathlon of his amazing run of 6 victories in a row at the famed and historic Wildflower Triathlon, which takes place in California. And this is one of the sort of iconic races of the sport. And Jesse won it 6 times in a row, more than any other athlete had. It's pretty amazing. It's a wonderful accomplishment. But as his coach, I didn't view every one of those wins. Yes, he crossed the finish line first, but I didn't view every single one of them as high performance. Now, there was one year in particular where Jesse, as always, arrived absolutely ready. He had a solid game plan. He trained really well. He knew his pacing and his strategy. He understood how to execute his nutrition, fueling, etc. And yet, and I don't actually honestly remember whether it was third or fourth victory. So let's go with third, but I think it was his third time that he won. I believe that he won despite himself. Over the course of that race, his pacing was pretty erratic. He missed aspects of his plan for nutrition. He didn't make the best strategic decisions over the course of the day. And yet, pretty much by some stroke of luck, because his competition also didn't really have their best performances, he won. In fact, with just 2 miles to go, Jesse sat in third place. And somehow he passed those 2 athletes in front of them in the final stretch of the race. And the truth is that it was really less to do with some heroic great effort by Jesse and more to do with the fact that his competition was faulty. And so, who cares? He won, right? Isn't that all that matters? The reflection trap. You see, here's the problem. Jesse didn't execute the plan. He failed to do the things under his control to the best of his ability. He got the win, but did he perform at his best? And the answer to that is no. And the danger here is that without reflection, our topic of the day, Jesse could easily just walk away drunk on joy because of the result, but blind to the areas that he actually needed to improve for further long term development. And I think this is one of the catalysts where we often see performances stagnating because you don't reflect, therefore, you don't grow. The reason this race really stays stuck in my mind is because I happened to be on site at this race. So I got to watch it live. And in the days following, when we came home and we unpacked the race, I was Jesse's harshest critic. In fact, it was probably the strongest that I was with Jesse, probably the most harsh I was over the course of all of his performances and over a decade of coaching, despite the fact that he'd won. I labeled the race a failure, a personal failure. And that was simply because he failed to do the things under his control to the best of his ability. He didn't execute. I labeled his race a failure, despite the fact that he won. And the reason for that is because failure for us was not executing the things under his control to the best of his ability. So therefore, that's what it was determined as. Now, to his credit, Jesse was right there with me. Because Jesse, as an athlete, was a master of reflection. And he knew that as soon as he allowed a little complacency to creep in, it was likely going to be the start of corrosion of performance. And in reflection, he realized that complacency had crept in on this race. Now, there's research that backs this up. In fact, there's a great research article in the Journal of Applied Sports Psychology that found that athletes who consistently reflect on their performances, whether they win or lose, and that's an important part, win or lose. It's easy to reflect when you lose what went wrong, but actually what went right on the victory. Athletes that actually reflect on their performances demonstrate significantly better long-term development compared to those that just rely solely on outcomes as a measure of success. In other words, the process of assessing your performance, not the outcome, is the thing that is the fuel that drives sustainable growth and improvements. And that's a really important component and concept to buy into. Jesse, our hero of our story, was the master in this trait. And therefore, he was a driver of much of his success that he enjoyed over a decade of ongoing improvements. And of course, race results that emerged out of that. Now, Jesse Thomas, he was a master of reflection, as I pointed out. And I think it was the driver of much of his success over the 10 years that he raced as a professional. But he didn't just wait to reflect at the end of a season or the end of a race. In fact, he would do it weekly, sometimes daily. And he'd always ask himself the same questions. What did I do well? Where can I improve? And what shall I focus on now going forward? And so the key lesson out of this is that winning or success, so far as outcomes, doesn't always mean you've performed well. And reflection is a really critical tool for you that forces us to look back at our execution and start to draw lessons. What can I build on? What did I do really well here? What was successful and why? But equally, where did I fall short? Not to punish yourself or create some form of blame, but actually to elicit opportunities for growth. And without it, a win can lull you into complacency. And those same mistakes are more than likely going to haunt you in future races or events. A key component around reflection.